My name is Sam, Tech Girl Wright, and I need to explain what it is exactly I do. And that's kind of difficult for me. I suppose you would call me an esports broadcaster. I predominantly desk host and interview on esports broadcasts, focusing on PUBG and Counter-Strike. I've also done some shoutcasting in my day. I'm not very good at it, but I can do it if the need arises. You probably don't really want to hear me shoutcast though. It's fine, I guess. But I did it so I could learn how that works. And esports broadcasting is my bread and butter. It's what pays my rent. It's what pays for some of the cool stuff around here. I also do a bunch of other things though. I mean, I'm hosting this podcast, Tech Girl Talks. I create content around esports and gaming on a multitude of multitude, is that the right word, of channels. I have a blog, a Twitter account, an Instagram account. I just got a Threads account, all of those things. So I create content as well. And that's pretty much what my job encompasses. This is Tech Girl Talks. This is my podcast. We are in season 4, and this is episode 1 of the new season. I've done 3 seasons before this, and we've had a lot of success. We've been nominated for awards. We've charted on Apple Podcasts, and this has always been a labor of love for me. It's a podcast that I make to increase my own knowledge, first and foremost. I create the content and I put it out there, but I don't necessarily care if no one listens because I just enjoy speaking to people and learning more. Each season, we've had a very specific focus. So last season, I focused in on Counter-Strike and some interesting people playing Counter-Strike because that is the game I love. For this season, I changed it and I decided to theme this season, that is my job. Because I realized that during my travels, during the work that I do, I come across some of the most interesting humans who do the coolest things in an industry that you tend to think, when you think job in esports, all you think is either talent, the person doing the broadcast, or professional player. But there's so many other working parts to this that come into play. And for this season, I want to chat to all of them. I thought, though, for the first episode, I'd introduce myself because I realized after 3 seasons, I actually haven't done that. So this is very weird for me because I don't like being the story. I like telling stories. I like telling people stories, which is why I think I got into the job I did. So it's a little bit weird that I'm now going to be sitting behind a camera, talking into a mic, trying to explain a little bit more about me and what I do. I don't actually know if I can make a full podcast. So normally I like to keep my episodes 30 minutes or longer. This one might only be 20 minutes. I've kind of given myself that time frame and then I can wrap it up because it's a little bit weird for me to talk about myself because, like I said, I like to tell stories. And that was kind of why I got into esports to begin with. I actually remember the first time I started doing my job. I'd been going to lots of esports events in South Africa, which is where I'm from. Esports is, even now, still such a small little niche of gaming. But when I first got interested in esports, it was actually my brother who was playing competitive Dota. There was like one esports event a year. It was like one LAN, and it happened in the basement of a gaming convention. No one even knew these players were downstairs competing. All the fun happened upstairs with the big exhibitions and things, but these people were all downstairs. My brother was one of them. I've never been good at games. I got to be clear. I've played games since I was young. I remember sitting on my dad's lap when he used to play Doom, and he used to let me hit the space bar when it was time to jump. We watched him play Lara Croft. He very quickly got us into Mortal Kombat 3, which was one of the first games I loved. Though when I think back at my age, I probably shouldn't have been playing Mortal Kombat 3. I remember playing Sindel. She was my favorite because she could wrap her hair around someone and throw them left to right. That was like my big thing, and I was just obsessed with it. And then the internet came into being, and I realized that you could go on these forums because, of course, I was 11 years old and my internet access was unrestricted. My parents at that stage didn't realize the dangers of the internet. So I used to go on these forums and you could find mods for your PC for Mortal Kombat, and I used to get them. Downloaded so many viruses onto my dad's PC, I'm sure, but added mods where you could do like baby fatalities in Mortal Kombat. That was my thing. I loved turning them into babies, weird stuff like that. And then we obviously played some appropriate age games, but no one cares about those. But that was where my gaming love started. But I was never good at games. My brother was. He was the genius, and he did dominate his time on the PC. I think through high school I was dealing with some stuff. I didn't play as much. And then in varsity got back into it. But from an esports point of view, I was always watching my brother because he was always at this one gaming convention. And we would go, in the beginning, we actually didn't know that he was competing. He kept that quiet, but I found out and I used to go watch him, and his friends used to come to our house to play. And I kind of got into the scene that way, and then started going to esports events. Obviously, as esports, this is how it works. You start meeting people, you start chatting to people. And I got quite obsessed with Counter-Strike at that point, just because a lot of my brother's Dota friends had moved over to Counter-Strike and they were playing Counter-Strike, so I knew them. But the more I watched it, the more I loved it as a game. I just found it so much fun. But more importantly, what I loved was the people playing it. I loved their stories because they were fascinating. There were so many fascinating people playing Counter-Strike at the time. A friend of mine, Sharon Wason, who sadly passed away about a month ago, actually. She was playing, and I met her, and I just loved her from the moment we met. We just hit it off. And she was so badass. My friend Ashton Goldsmuller, he used to play Dota with my brother. He was playing, and he turned out to be really good. I say that surprised because I'd seen Ash in my house most Saturdays, so I didn't think much of him. Sorry, Ash. It was just because you were like always half asleep and demanding that I made you tea. But he was playing for a team called Energy Esports, which at the time was like top dog. And there were a bunch of other players that started popping up. And I'm not going to go through them, but the point was I just loved their stories. I loved the beef. I loved when someone left, Ash left Energy, went to Bravado. Energy and Bravado had this like weird, massive battle going on where they were always trying to be the top team. And that was what I loved. And I loved telling people this. Like I would literally spend so much time telling my friends, this is why this is so cool. I would explain the game, which was Counter-Strike at the time, tell them why Counter-Strike was so cool, and then tell them about all these players and these personalities. And I couldn't understand why people weren't getting as excited as me. So I started making YouTube videos, which most of these have been removed from the internet because they're horrific. But I took it upon myself to start telling these stories. And actually, even before that, what had happened, and when I decided that this was something I wanted to do, I had been working in journalism, which I'll get into. I'd studied journalism. Now I've just got into it. So there we go. I studied journalism, majoring in politics. Went on to do an honors degree in media and communication science, where I majored in media studies and sort of specialized in media ethics. They wanted me to do my master's. They actually invited me to apply for that and get a bursary. But at that point, I thought I wanted to be in the real world working. I didn't think that the scholar life was for me. But I had that background. I'd been working at a radio station in the newsroom, and then I'd moved into a more corporate role in a marketing department for a B2B business. I was a bit bored, so I started this blog where I could sort of write. I did tech reviews at the time. Never did gaming reviews because I didn't feel I was qualified enough, because I was never really good at games. I was playing them, but I sucked. I always had to put them on easy mode. So I was just focusing on tech reviews. But then I went to the launch of a very big esports event that was coming to South Africa. And like I said, South Africa was really small at the time in terms of anything really esports related, but it was this massive event, and they were flying in Paul Red Eye Chalona, who's obviously, he was just the biggest personality in esports at the time. He was a Dota 2 host, and I'd obviously been to all these esports events, and I was a huge follower of everything, and I told my friends, and I wasn't really writing about it at the time. But I went to this event, and I remember seeing Ash, who I brought up earlier. He was running around so excited because there was so much media there. There was like this huge presence of people writing about esports in Africa for the first time. And he came to me and he said, this is it. This is the moment it changes. Finally, people will notice and see that this is a legitimate thing. And he was so excited, he ran off. And I remember just feeling broken inside, because at this point I'd worked in the media industry for a while, and I knew that that's not how that works. They would be super hyped tonight. They'll interview you. They'll maybe write an article tomorrow, and then they'll go on to the next thing, and they'll forget about everything you're saying and you're talking about. And I just got this bee in my bonnet, and I actually wrote a blog post the next day where I said, this is why South African esports is so cool, and this is why you need to pay attention. I wrote that, and I said there in this blog post, and it's still up on my blog, I put at the end there, I'm going to do this. I'm going to write these stories, and I'm going to tell them every single time, because if no one else will, I will. Like, I've decided. I don't care if there isn't the hype. I'm going to do it anyway, with or without the hype. And that was like a promise that I made, and I put out on this little blog that no one was reading. And then I buckled down and got into it. I took a shitty phone camera, and off I ran. I started going to these events. I made the worst YouTube videos. Like I said, most of them have never seen the light of day, or they have, and they've been taken down. They were so bad. It was so bad. I think the worst one I did was the Bachelors of South African Counter-Strike, where I interviewed a bunch of bachelors. JT from Complexity was actually in that. I think he was like 16. Just feels really off now. It was just bad. They were badly edited. They were badly done. But I did these vlogs of these events. I did like really weird, funny stuff. Like my questions were always like completely just in a weird place. I never really introduced people either. Like I didn't know the ins and outs of broadcast, but I was making these videos because I was passionate about esports. And I was very lucky because I was then spotted by someone working in corporate, one of the PR managers for a brand that was sponsoring this massive event that Red Eye was going to be coming to host. He came out for a launch and then was coming back to host it. And they said to me, we really need a woman to be on the stage because Paul has said that he wants to work with local talent and we've realized we have no women. So that was a little bit of a weird one at the time because I wasn't qualified to be on stage. They wanted me to co-host with him. That's a huge thing. Co-hosting is a huge thing. And I never hosted. I never held a mic. I was making these like fun YouTube videos. I'd obviously worked in radio, so I did have broadcast experience, but not at a live event. Definitely not in esports. And there was a little bit of a weird feeling about someone saying, well, we just need a woman. It was kind of like, your only qualification is that you have a vagina, so let's go. But I'm not going to turn it down, right? I'm a firm believer in opportunities come to you and you grab them. And then you do the best damn possible job you can. And I did at the time. It was called the Telkom DGL Masters. And shit, I did try. I didn't even know where to start, but I figured I just needed to like emulate what I'd seen on TV from like sports presenters and also emulate what I was watching because I was watching international esports. So I figured if I could just kind of copy the style of things I was seeing, I'd be fine. I was terrible. I was absolutely horrific. I remember watching being like, now, like watching back a few years later, just being like, what the fuck? Like it was bad. At the time though, I thought I was nailing it. Like I was having the best time. I had a really bad moment during this event. So I was doing Counter-Strike, so like hosting and interviewing, and then they put me on Dota as well. And my brother played Dota, but I really struggled with Dota. And I didn't understand the nuances of interviewing players. That was a big thing. So I had to do a loser's interview, which in hindsight, I don't think anyone who's completely inexperienced in interviewing players should ever be made to do a loser's interview. But here we are, I did it. And I asked the player something and he disagreed with me. I think this is a mistake everyone makes in esports broadcasting, which is I tried to show that I knew what I was talking about because I felt like I didn't really know the game. This is a big thing that happens a lot. You see it. So in my mind, I don't really know Dota. I know my brother plays it. I know it at a very base level. But when I'm watching higher gameplay, I don't know it. And in order for me to deal with my own insecurity about not knowing, instead of owning that and saying, listen, I don't actually know this game that well, I felt I had to go on stage and like show how much knowledge I had, which, like I said, is a mistake. Everyone does in the beginning. So off I ran onto stage and I asked this very long-winded question about a specific thing that I had seen and that I'd heard the commentators talk about. And I said to the player, did this happen because of this? And he went, no. He just looked at me and he went, no. In that moment, the next follow-up question should have been, well, what do you think happened? Or the next question should have been why, or I should have done something. But instead, this one-worded, he's just lost the game. And I literally said, oh, is this why you lost it? Like you played shit here. Not really the brightest thing. But anyway, I then proceeded to follow that up and argue with him on stage about, well, I think that it did happen because of this. And he went, well, no, it didn't. It was a very awkward interview. And I ended up getting nicknamed Cringe Girl by the chat because it was cringe. And that was the start of my journey into esports. I became Cringe Girl, which at the time was quite hurtful and it did hurt a little bit, but I leaned into it. I just decided that I was just going to embody it. So every time I did something silly, I just went, Cringe Girl. And I think that kind of enamored at least the pro players to me because they could see that I kind of just accepted the fact that there were things that maybe I needed to learn. Which is interesting because in South Africa, I think none of us really knew what we were doing. But regardless, at the end of this event, Paul sat me down and he said, there's something there. There's a passion, at least, for the game, not Dota, Counter-Strike. There's a passion there. So I think we can, I can help you. And there's opportunities for you if that's something that you'd want. And so I kind of played with that idea for a while, and then I met up with him. I was in the UK for work because I was now working at a corporate company that had flown me out there for work, and I had coffee with him during the first ever esports awards. Actually, he was busy prepping for that, so we met at the venue, and I have photos from that. Had a cup of coffee before the live show, chatted a little bit, and he basically offered to help me, which he did. He gave me a lot of feedback, helped me sort of hone and improve my craft, and then offered to sign me to the agency he had just started, which at the time, again, it all just seemed a little bit wild. Signed, and then he got me a job at Gamescom, which was my first ever international job. I did a CSGO show match, and then I hosted, this is such a fun one because I was actually reminded of this the other day. I hosted the first ever Dragon Ball Fighters tournament at Gamescom. It was the first time that game had ever, it was actually in beta, I think, and it was showcased, and I hosted the first tournament. And that was my first gig. I'd never even really used an in-ear. And I went in there, and I remember Pansy was in the green room because she was doing a PUBG job, and she was like my hero from Counter-Strike, and I couldn't talk to her. I've actually told her this since, because we've worked together since then. I sat in the green room watching her for a good 15 minutes. I could not talk to her. She was getting her makeup done. I could not even say hello. It's kind of embarrassing. Ironically, that show match that I hosted, the CSGO one, it was actually Hugo, who was, if you're a Counter-Strike fan, you'll know who that is. He was commentating alongside Tom Biz. If you're a Valorant fan, you'll know that. So that was basically my start and how I got into it. And then from there, different jobs came up. I loved Counter-Strike. That was the job I wanted to, the title I wanted to work in. But I was told that there wasn't really space at an international level. So I ended up having to do a lot of different games, which in hindsight, I'm really glad I did, because I feel like I learned so much having to be pushed into games that I wasn't familiar with. I'd have to spend time learning them. So I really learned the nuances of investigative journalism, I suppose. It's not really investigative journalism, but investigating, researching, learning, not just from, because you can play a game as much as you want, but at the highest level, it's so different to what you play. So like learning how to analyze high level gameplay, learning how to find out who the players were and what their stories were, investigating them, figuring that all out, learning to study that was kind of what I had to do as I jumped from title to title. I've done so many weird and wonderful. I've done Crossfire, which is like a budget Counter-Strike in China. I didn't do Counter-Strike overseas, but I carried on working in Counter-Strike in South Africa. Did lots of fighting games, Street Fighter, Tekken, Splatoon, even Smash as well. Splatoon's not a fighting game. I just said that because I was thinking of Smash, because this is really uncomfortable for me and I hate talking about myself like this. It's fucking weird. But yeah, so like that was what I kind of did. I even did e-golf at Made in Denmark, which is like a very famous golf tournament, that a real life golf tournament. They set up a tent, and there was the real life golf tournament happening around us, and we did e-golf in the tent, which was so weird. So I learned golf in 3 months so that I could do that event. And I've done that for a couple of years. I then kind of narrowed it down. I did a lot of PUBG, a lot of Counter-Strike back in South Africa. Still constantly just trying to break into Counter-Strike because that's the game that I wanted to do. And then eventually at the beginning of 2022, I changed agencies. I moved to .x and told them that I wanted to do Counter-Strike, and they've kind of pushed me, and I've had an opportunity now to do a lot of Counter-Strike work, which is amazing, and I hope that continues. And I do still do PUBG work for as long as the PUBG community will have me and it fits in with the schedule. I'd like to stay part of it, but obviously Counter-Strike is where my heart is because it's where I started, like I explained. But that's basically my job. I suppose now would be the time to talk about, I've told you what I studied, I've told you what my job is. I think for me, I've given you a little bit of insights. I think improving came with working lots of events, but also then understanding how to just find stuff out. I felt for me a lot of the improvements in my career came from just watching other people. For a long time, that's all I did. I watched them and tried to emulate them. And then I think the big change happened at the end of 2021, where I kind of said, okay, cool, I've done everything by the book. I watched so many YouTube videos on like news reading, sports hosting, like all the serious like textbook stuff that you have to do. A lot of it you also learn on the job. And then I kind of decided at the end of 2021 that I just wanted to change it up. I was tired of emulating other people. I kind of wanted to just be myself and show a little bit of the quirkiness that maybe bring back a bit of cringe girl, if you like. And I started doing that as well. I'm now swinging on my chair, which is like a broadcast 101 do not do, but it's because I'm really nervous talking to the camera. I don't know if I've told you that like 7 times. Talking to a camera, talking into a mic, this is a bit weird. But that was how I came to be where I am. That is how I improved, and hopefully I can keep doing this job. But the point is to kind of give you a little bit of an understanding of what it is I do. And then also, one of the questions that I'm going to ask a lot of our guests throughout the season is if the barrier to entry is high. And this is always a curious one, because I think in esports there is no barrier. If you want to play, if you want to commentate, if you want to produce, if you want to take photos, you can. Anyone can. You can just start it up. If you want to do shoutcasting, you can just switch on your PC and commentate on your friends' games, and there you are. You stream that and you've already started. So from a barrier to entry, no, but I think is the barrier to entry high, or to start getting paid gigs and turn this into a career? 100% it is. It's difficult because, like anything in entertainment, only a few get the opportunities. Not everyone gets those shots. And I think for me, coming from South Africa, which is like where esports wasn't even crawling. Like, they say you have to crawl, then walk, then run. I feel like esports was still lying in the crib being like, feed me while I shit in my nappy. I can't do anything else. Like, that was what I felt South African esports was. I think we can crawl now. I think we're out of the crib, but I mean, maybe we're like walking every so often and then we fall over and bash our heads. I probably shouldn't say that. I'm also going to write this down because I feel like that would make a great YouTube short. But that was kind of where I was at when I started, was coming from this region where no one knew who we were. No one was watching our games. I think we got like 30 people watching like the biggest games. That big tournament I spoke about, I think there were like 100 people in the stream. That was it, like concurrent viewers. So it's really difficult. The barrier to entry to break overseas is really difficult. I was lucky. I had someone who saw me, who saw talent. I had a lucky break. It was literally a lucky break because someone wanted a woman on the stage. And that's someone who I do know personally, and I've spoken to for years since then. She didn't want it. She was a woman and she had been told it needs to be a woman, but she didn't want it to just be a woman. She wanted someone who was passionate and who loved the community. And I'm so grateful to her for giving me that shot. But I'm also grateful because Red Eye was able to spot me and give me more opportunities. So I think I had a bit of a lucky break. But I do think if you're coming from a smaller region, it's really difficult to break in. And I've actually done a YouTube video about this in the past, and maybe I can upload it as a special edition podcast episode. But it's tough. For me, I was lucky. My dad he was born in the UK. He only moved to South Africa when he was about 19 years old, 20 years old. So I have a British passport. Because one side of my family is completely British. And I was very lucky because that allowed me to travel visa-free to Europe to work, which makes a huge difference. I think South African passports are really difficult to travel on because you need visas. But saying that, in the last year, I've seen so many South Africans. Before me, the only South African who was on esports broadcast as a talent was Quickshot from League of Legends, who's one of my heroes and idols. He had moved overseas, but I hadn't seen anyone else do what I do. Now I see so many South Africans on broadcasts. Quite a few are being flown over to Europe, even on South African passports. So there is hope. We are crawling, bashing our heads every so often, but crawling, which is great news. So the barrier to entry question has been answered. I'm rushing through these because it's so awkward. But I did go over 20 minutes, which I think is quite exciting. The hardest part of my job. This is interesting because I think that I want to say, before I would have told you that the hardest part of my job was the online hate, because you get a lot of it. And everyone seems to think that they know who you are as a person and they know everything about you, and they really don't. But it's not anymore. I think for me, as I've got older, and maybe that's just a maturity thing, I think the hardest part of my job is being away so often, because one of the things is you're constantly flown to these shows, and you never say no to work because you're a freelancer. So you go away for weeks at a time. You're in and out of the country, and these jobs come in. You normally get about a month's notice, sometimes less. So you miss a lot of like important things. That's what I realized. You miss birthdays and weddings and just like milestones with the people you love and your family, and then you feel quite detached from them because you go to a job where there is a car waiting for you when you get out the airport to drive you to a hotel, where you get a menu that you you get told what to eat for the next 2 weeks. You go, here's some choices. So your food is, that's how your food is decided. And then you get told, this is when you need to wake up. This is when you need to be at the venue. This is when you'll work. And then this is when you'll come back to the hotel to sleep and you'll go back. So you've got this like very regimented schedule, but you live in this like bubble where you don't really see what else is happening, because our jobs are such in broadcast that you get to the venue, you do makeup, and then you live, and it can be anything from a 4-hour to a 16-hour day, and that's your full focus, because you do need to watch the games. You need to be completely invested in everything that's going on, and while you're watching the games, you're listening to people chat about what's happening, and your whole life is that bubble and those people, and then you go back to the hotel and maybe you have a drink with those people, and then you go to bed. But everyone back at home's lives are going on. Things are happening. Like people are getting sick and they're not telling you. Or that was a big thing for me. I mentioned my friend Shaz. I got to host the Blast TV Paris Major earlier this year, which was probably the highlight of my career so far. And Shaz is a dear friend of mine. Was a dear friend of mine, but we were very close and we spoke all the time. And the whole time we were speaking during the major, and she was sending me messages of support and just giving me advice sometimes when I asked her about the way I was questioning people on the desk. The whole time that was happening, she didn't tell me that she was in hospital because she didn't want me to worry on the job. And she passed away a little while after I got back. And yeah, I mean, it just sucks. It sucks that you feel disconnected, that people don't want to tell you that they're sick because they don't want you to stress because they know that you need to do a show. It sucks that you miss those big moments. It sucks that sometimes your birthday is on a plane. Sometimes your mom's birthday, you're not there. You miss some cool stuff. So I'd say that's the hardest part of my job. The best part about my job is that I get to tell incredible stories. I've been part of telling the stories of so many incredible players over the years. I just recently did Red Bull Kumite, which was the first time a global esports event came to South Africa. And the South African player who was participating, Jubby M, I've known him since before he was a winner. When the first ever fighting games Red Bull hit the streets, which was a South African qualifier, happened, I was interviewing him and chatting to him before that tournament, and then he won that tournament and he went overseas and he lost badly, and I interviewed him about that, and I interviewed him over the years, so I've been able to follow his story to this point where he does Red Bull Kumite. He walks on the stage, his whole family is there to watch him for the first time. They get to see him live, they don't get to watch him on a TV, and he beats Takedo, which was one of the best Street Fighter players of all time. He beats him live, and his family's there, and everyone's crying, and I get to be there and be like, I've had a role in building up to this moment, and I've followed your journey. That to me was probably one of the best moments of my career. Another phenomenal moment was a young player called Thabo Young Savage Malloy. He's a FIFA player. I also got to interview him just after he had won his first big tournament, and then follow his story, which was so difficult because Thabo came from really humble beginnings and wasn't a well-off family. Gaming for him was just a bonus. He had this, there's so much I want to say that I'm trying to protect as well, the integrity of the player, but he lost his dad and he became the sole breadwinner for his mom and his little sister, and he was still in school when this happened, and he needed esports to work for him so that he could make money for his family, and he ended up signing and becoming a Red Bull athlete. And now, as I'm recording this podcast, he's in Saudi Arabia playing in the South African national team for the FIFA E Nations Cup. So I've got to follow his story and talk about him. And then obviously we can get into Counter-Strike and talk about all the South African players. But for me, I've watched so many of these phenomenal players for so long. Forrest, Crims. I watched them play on TV. I sat on my couch and I watched them I say TV, but on my PC, on Twitch, on my television. And then I get to go to a show where they're at, and I get to talk to them, and I get to interview them, or I get to talk about their play style on the desk, and I get to add to these incredible stories that I've followed for so long. And I feel like that's the best part of my job, is being able to add those little nuances and build on those stories and write chapters in these books that are just so fascinatingly interesting. And also, I get to watch games, which is pretty. I get to watch Counter-Strike, which I might suck at it, but I just love it. I love the hype. I love the excitement. So I think that would be the best part of my job, the way I see it. And And then one of the other questions I like to ask everyone that I interview for this season is, do you need to have a love of games to do what you do? I think for me, I'm someone that's driven by passion. So like if I didn't enjoy this, I wouldn't do it. And I get asked this a lot. People are like, oh, do you even play games? Yes. Because trust me when I tell you, you could not sit for 4 days, 16-hour days, having to watch, because as much as you might see, I'm a desk host, so you only see the desk for like 4 or 5 minutes in between games, but I'm there for 16 hours. In order to do the desk, I have to watch the games. That's the first thing. It's my job. But secondly, do you honestly think that someone would spend 16 hours watching that much Counter-Strike or that much PUBG and not love it? Who would put themselves through that? I love it. I absolutely live for it. I love the stories. I love the drama. I love the chaos in the server. And I don't think anyone can do this job if they don't have love for the game. And I think that you'll see that throughout season 4 with the people that I chat to. Like, you have to love this. And we do love it. We all love it. We're driven by it. We're so passionate about it. Most of us started working for free because we just wanted to be part of it. And I think that if you don't have that, like, if you're not a fan first and foremost, you won't stick it out, because it's freaking hard and it's tough and it can be rough. It's fun, but you wouldn't stick it out if you didn't love it. So you definitely do need to have a love for the game. And then the final question is, if you weren't doing this job, what would you be doing? I have no cooking clue, if I'm honest. Like I said, I studied journalism. I could probably work in a marketing firm or an advertising firm, but I do think I was already getting bored doing that. I'm not designed to be like sitting at a desk doing that stuff and filling out timesheets. So I'm not sure. I do know now that what I'd love to do is produce esports shows. I'd love to be a producer, but I think that if I didn't do this job, I wouldn't have known that either. So what would I be doing? The answer is I have no cooking clue, because I can't imagine not doing this, because it brings me so much joy. And then I normally end off all of season 4 asking where people can find you. So where people can find me is right here on Tech Girl Talks, my podcast, which I really hope you'll enjoy as much as I have enjoyed putting together for this season. We have so many interesting stories, far more interesting than mine. Just fascinating insights into the esports industry. There is, if you're a Counter-Strike lover, there is a very strong focus on Counter-Strike in some of them as well, which you'll love. We got so many cool tidbits, and I am so excited to share this season with you. I'm so glad that this is over, though, episode 1 with me, because I am the least interesting guest you're going to listen to or see throughout the season. So make sure that you hit the subscribe button or the follow button or whatever button it is you have to hit, that you make sure that you get reminded every Thursday when new episodes drop. The YouTube videos will be dropping on Tuesday as well. And yeah, you can also find me at TechGirlZA everywhere else if you want to chat about the podcast, and keep listening. I can't wait for you to see, hear, listen, whatever it is, to what we have in store for season 4.